In the 4th century BC, Pytheas, a Greek geographer, makes reference to the islands of the Britanni, which lay somewhere northwest of continental Europe. The Britannicae, as they were written, was referred to by a variety of names, but it eventually became Britannicae, which the Romans knew in Latin as Britanniae. Information on the Britanniae was fleeting and conflicting. Some were convinced that there were 3 major islands: Albion, Hibernia, and Thule. Others said that there were only 2 islands, and others still said that there was a whole rich continent the size of Africa. Some dismissed the concept as entirely fictional, or as a myth of the Gauls. In 55 BC, Julius Caesar visited the Britanniae, confirming that there was some landmass there. Then, by 43 AD, the Romans came, saw, and conquered, bringing the most proximate island into the empire's sphere of influence. They installed a king, Tiberius Claudius Cogidubnus, who described himself as the Magni Regni Britannia, the great king of the province Britannia. When the Romans came, they brought the concept of a recognisable single entity of Britain. Though British history begins at this point, there were no Britons. Before Rome, there were many smaller tribes divided by local warring allegiances and totally different dialects. There was no reason why the presence of the Romans would have fostered a permanent united identity. Rome may have viewed the British as homogeneous, but that did not make them homogeneous. The first example of British identity is given as Boudica, a 1st century tribal queen from modern Norfolk. She was married to Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni, when the Romans invaded. The Iceni were spared. They had positive relations with the Romans, so were left independent and were enriched by an influx of Roman loans and money. So when Prasutagus died, he understood that Iceni independence was secure, so he promised his kingdom half to his daughters and half to the emperor. But Rome ignored his will and annexed the Iceni fully, recalling its debts and giving his daughters nothing, which impoverished the Iceni. Boudica sprang into action. She fought against the Romans, burning cities and attempting to assure her daughters' inheritance. Supposedly, she had almost repelled the Romans from the island entirely, but ultimately she failed. So to avoid capture, she'd poisoned herself. Boudica never acted out of British identity, unity, or pride. Her aims related entirely to her own kingdom. Pushing the Romans out of Britain would have been a byproduct of ensuring Iceni independence. Even if she felt entitled to a claim to unite Britain, to many this would be replacing one distant overlord with another. Though the tribes knew themselves to be British, this meant very little. Local identities and allegiances reigned supreme. So, with the arrival of Germanic individuals in the 5th century, they had local identities and their own local dialects with their own local beliefs, quickly establishing their own kingdoms like Bernicia, Deira, or Kent. Their social dominance meant that, at least in their Germanic kingdoms, their language became the one through which government was convened and business was conducted. For other individuals, one could only advance socially if speaking the Germanic language. This made many non-Germanic people willingly change the language they spoke, the beliefs they held, and their whole identity. So, identities were in flux in the east of Britain, where Germanic kingdoms were most found. But in the west, people still expressed themselves in non-Germanic ways. By the 8th century, we know that Germanic and non-Germanic cultures were split, with Offa's Dyke being the cultural boundary as much as it was a military one. This gave birth to resentment, which gave birth to narratives. It appeared that the Germanic people had invaded, pushing the non-Germanic people westward and taking the island. Bede wrote this at the time and justified it. God had punished the non-Germanic people. To him, the non-Germanic people were Britons. They were pushed westward, overseas, or into servitude. Non-Germanic people may still have been split into many kingdoms, but they saw themselves as united against their persecutor. They told stories about Vortigern, the inept king who they blamed for losing their land, and ultimately, about where they came from, long before they owned the island, justifying why the island was theirs in the first place. Long ago, after the Trojan War, the majority of the inhabitants of Troy were killed or enslaved, and few survivors, who were led by Aeneas, fled to Italy where they settled, lived, procreated and expanded, naming their new home after themselves. Ticius settled in Tuscany, Longobard in Lombardy, and Romulus, the famous one, in Rome. Supposedly, there was also Brutus. Brutus was contacted one day by the Roman goddess Diana, and was told that he should go northwest past Gaul and find the island of Albion, which was home to a few giants. Brutus did just that, went to Albion, killed the few giants, and crowned himself king. Then he named his kingdom after himself, Britain. Brutus for the Britons marked the start of British history. His name is first mentioned in the 9th century as a Roman general who led the Britons, but by the 12th it became a fully fledged mythology. It featured Greek, Roman, Celtic and Germanic styles combined in a Christian context. It tied Britons to the classical world, as they were, ultimately, just like the Romans. All kings of the Britons could trace their lineage back, past Vortigern the incapable king, to Brutus, the first British king. But by the 12th century, years of mortality and famine, together with the inveterate spirit of faction that was among them, had made this proud people degenerate. To the English, they were now known as Walish, a derogatory term meaning foreigners or non-Germanic. The Britons called themselves Combrogi, a term meaning fellow countrymen. These terms evolved to describe the land that the British inhabited west of Offa's Dyke. In English, it's now known as Wales, and in the Brittonic language, Welsh, it's known as Cymru. The identity British fell out of favour for the next 300 years. Of course, this isn't the end of British identity. There's a whole other, more modern chapter of Britishness. If you'd like to learn about that, please hit the like button to let me know, and subscribe to my channel. Did I pronounce anything incorrectly? I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments. Have a good day.